For 3,000 years, the armor remained silent. For 3,000 years, it lay in the very heart of a dead planet, among the bones of the civilization that had created it and failed to sustain it. Hundreds of beings had tried to don it. Emperors, warriors, gods in the eyes of their peoples. They had all laid their hands on it, and they had all received the same answer. Silence and pain that drove them mad in seconds. And then a man came, unaware he was standing before the galaxy's most ancient weapon, and simply asked, "May I?" And for the first time in 3,000 years, the armor responded. If you asked any archivist in the Great Commonwealth what the armor of the first ones was, they would tell you a story told to children as a warning, not a fairy tale. A story of a race calling themselves the Kintar, the oldest known civilization, whose technology surpassed anything that came after them by tens of thousands of years. It was they who created the armor, not just a suit of armor, but a living, sentient system woven from matter that modern science still couldn't fully explain. It wasn't a tool. It was a partner. And this partner couldn't be tricked, bought, or subjugated by force. The Kintar vanished long before any living race learned to light fire. Their planets turned to dust, their cities to legend, their language to dead, symbols no one could read anymore. But the armor remained. It outlived its creators, outlived dozens of civilizations that came and went, and continued to lie in its sanctum on the dead planet of Kavsharam, waiting. Though for what? No one knew. For 3,000 years, representatives of every significant race in the galaxy attempted to don it. There came the heavily armored warriors of the Dracorian Empire, their muscles forged for war by nature itself. There came the sages of the Voltarian Order, whose minds could calculate probabilities faster than any computer. There came emperors whose power extended across thousands of star systems, confident that their title and lineage were sufficient to earn the ancient artifact's favor. They all received the same thing, a moment of touch, a flash of pain piercing the mind, and a voice. It could be called a voice, uttering a single word in a language no one understood, but whose meaning was clear without translation. No. Over time, the armor of the first ones became less a coveted trophy than a curse, a legend feared to be approached. The Council of the Great Commonwealth officially declared the area around Kavsharam off-limits, not out of respect for the ancient secrets, but for practical reasons. Too many ambitious leaders had lost their minds trying to prove their exceptionalism before a hunk of metal that seemed to defy the very concept of authority. Derek Hale knew none of this when his escape pod crashed on the surface of Kavsharam after his research vessel was destroyed by pirates in deep space. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't an adventurer in the traditional sense. Just an engineer from Earth, sent as part of a small Commonwealth mission to explore abandoned technological artifacts on the fringes of the known universe, because humanity, newly welcomed into the galactic community, was still trying to prove it deserved a seat at the table. He emerged from the shattered capsule, stunned, bloodied, with a broken arm, and a shattered transmitter that couldn't reach the nearest Commonwealth base, thousands of light years away. The planet's atmosphere was breathable but lifeless. No birds, no insects, not a single sound except the wind blowing to the ruins of a civilization that vanished long before the first humans set foot on Earth. He wandered for several days, saving his meager supplies of water and food, following a strange signal picked up by the remains of his instruments, a faint, barely perceptible pulse of energy emanating from the depths of ancient ruins. He didn't know he was walking toward the most guarded and most dangerous artifact in the known galaxy. He was simply searching for anything that might mean salvation. The sanctuary turned out to be a vast chamber, carved into the rock millions of years ago, adorned with symbols of a language long since lost to the dust of history. In the center of the chamber, on a pedestal carved from material unparalleled by known science, lay the armor, dark, almost black, with barely noticeable veins of light pulsating beneath the surface, as if a heart were beating within. Derek paused at the threshold, feeling a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air temperature. Something about this place felt alive, not literally, but in the way a forest feels alive before a thunderstorm just moments before it hits. "Hey!" he said out loud, feeling stupid at the sound of his own voice in the dead silence. "Is anyone here?" There was no answer. Of course. Stones don't respond. But the energy pulsing beneath the armor's surface flared brighter for a moment, as if listening. He moved closer, momentarily forgetting the pain in his broken arm, the thirst, the fear that had haunted him for the past few days. Something drew him forward, not physical strength, but something more subtle, more inexplicable, like the curiosity of a child who sees something beautiful and cannot look away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, reaching his good hand toward the armor surface. "I don't mean to steal anything. I need help. I'm stranded here. My arm is broken, and I don't know if I'll survive another night on this planet. If you can help me, fine. If not, I'm sorry to bother you." He touched the surface of the armor, and the world exploded with light. Derek fell to his knees, blinded by a flash unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Not the sharp pain the ancient legends of other races warned of, but something else. A flood of images, emotions, memories too alien, too ancient for the human mind to fully process. He saw, or felt, an entire civilization, living and dying in the split second of his perception. He saw a war that wiped an entire race from the face of the galaxy. He saw the final act of the armor's creators. Not a weapon for conquest, but guardian left to wait. Not for the strongest, not the wisest, not the noblest by birth, but for someone worthy for an entirely different reason, one Derek couldn't yet understand. A voice, ancient, multi-layered, sounding at dozens of frequencies that the human ear should not be able to detect, but somehow did, spoke in his mind. "For 3,000 years I've waited. For 3,000 years the strong, the wise, the noble have come, and they all wanted me for themselves. You are the first to ask permission not for victory, but for survival. The first to not demand, but ask." Derek, still kneeling, stunned, tried to speak, but the voice continued, and at that moment, across the planet, across the system, through the communication channels that permeated the galaxy of the Great Commonwealth, a wave of energy swept through, felt by everyone sensitive enough to catch it, from the ancient orders of the Voltarian sages to the furthest military bases of the Dracorian Empire. "I choose you, Derek Hale, of the human race. Not because you are strong, not because your blood is noble, but because, when you needed me most, you still asked for permission instead of taking it. That is the one quality my creator sought 3,000 years ago, and the one quality no other race has ever demonstrated in all these millennia." The light enveloped his body, not searing, but warm, like a hug he hadn't expected to receive in his most desperate moment. He felt the broken bone in his arm mend, the exhaustion he'd accumulated over days wandering a dead planet melt away, the ancient metal, if it was metal at all as we know it, wrap itself around his body, becoming a part of him, not dominating, but rather connecting. When the light faded, Derek stood in the center of the sanctuary, clad in armor the likes of which the galaxy had not seen for 3,000 years, armor that, until that moment, had rejected every emperor, every warrior, every sage who had dared approach it with a claim to its rightful possession. He didn't know at that moment that somewhere far away, on the command bridge of the Dracorian Empire's flagship, an old admiral whose family had dreamed of possessing the armor of the first ones for centuries felt the energy signal his fleet had been tracking for decades suddenly come to life after 3 millennia of silence. He didn't know that in the halls of the Voltarian Order, the sages whose prophecies were considered infallible stood frozen in shock, for the first time in centuries unable to explain the event that had just occurred. He didn't know that his own government on Earth, still struggling for respect among the star powers, had received a signal that would forever change humanity's status in the eyes of the galaxy. He knew only one thing. He was alive, his arm no longer hurt, and the strange, warm presence in his mind, like a second voice whispering softly on the edge of his perception, felt less like a threat than companionship. "Who are you?" he asked mentally, still not fully believing in the reality of what was happening. "I am what remains of a people who learned one truth too late for themselves, but just in time for you," the voice replied. "Power without permission is tyranny. My creators realized this when it was too late to save themselves. They created me to wait for someone who would understand this from the start." Derek slowly raised his hand, examining the dark surface of the armor, feeling the energy beneath it pulse in time with his own heartbeat. "I just want to survive," he thought honestly. "That's precisely why you're worthy," Bronya replied. "Everyone else wanted power. You only wanted one more day to live, and you asked for it with respect, not a demand. For 3,000 years, I haven't waited for a hero. I've waited for a man. A rescue beacon, now embedded within the armor's very structure, a technology human science couldn't even begin to comprehend, sent a signal that was received by a Commonwealth ship within hours. But by the time the rescue team arrived on Cav-Sharam, word had already spread throughout the known galaxy. The Forbidden Planet, guarded by a legendary artifact for 3,000 years, had finally responded. And it responded to a human, the first to react were the Dracorians, a warrior race for whom strength was a primary currency of respect. Their fleet's flagship, the very one that sensed the signal's awakening, changed course and headed straight for Cav-Sharam, carried with it Admiral Vorhak Kshatriya, whose family had dreamed for 20 generations of the moment when the armor of the first ones would finally recognize a worthy master. And of course, they always assumed that master would be a Dracorian, for who else but a warrior born for battle could deserve a weapon of such power? When the flagship arrived in orbit around Cav-Sharam and Vorhak descended to the surface with his honor guard, he found not a defeated foe, not a weakling trembling before his greatness, but a man, an ordinary man, not particularly tall, not particularly impressive by the standards of a warlike race, sitting calmly at the entrance to the sanctuary, finishing the last rations from his emergency supplies, as if nothing unusual had happened. "You!" Vorhak said, his voice booming like thunder in the dead silence of the planet. "A man! You are armor that belongs to those more worthy." Derek looked up, chewed the last piece of rations, and said with a calmness that took the Dracorian by surprise, "She decided for herself who it belonged to. Maybe we should ask her, not me?" Vorhak frowned, a gesture that on his scaly face was terrifying even to his own kind. He stepped forward, preparing to issue a formal challenge to combat, a demand that, by the laws of Dracorian honor, no sane opponent could refuse. But before he could finish speaking, Brony's voice boomed around them both, the same layered, ancient voice Derek had heard in his mind, only now spoken aloud, loud enough for the Admiral's entire honor guard to hear. "Vorhak Kshatriya, of the Kshatriya line, 20 generations of your family have dreamed of possessing me. Do you know why I never chose any of them? Because each one came with a demand, not a question. You're making the same mistake now." The Admiral froze, his clawed hand resting on the hilt of the ceremonial blade trembling slightly. "I do not belong to the strongest. I do not belong to the noblest. I belong to one who remembers, even in times of desperate need, that respect is more important than power. Your ancestor, the founder of your house, came here 1,000 years ago and tried to take me by force. I rejected him, as I reject you now, not because your strength is insufficient, but because your intentions were flawed from the start." Vorhak stood motionless for a long moment, struggling with the centuries-old pride of his kind, with the expectations borne by every fiber of his upbringing. Then, to the surprise of his own guards, he slowly bowed his head, not in defeat, but in a gesture that among Dracorians signified a rare acknowledgement of another's rightness. "Then I'll ask a question that hasn't been asked for 20 generations of my family," he said, addressing Bronya directly. "What should I have done differently?" "Ask," she answered simply. "How he did it." Vorhak turned to Derek, and there was something new in his gaze, not contempt, not envy, but the sincere, almost morbid curiosity of a creature confronted for the first time with a truth that contradicted everything it had been taught since birth. "A man, Derek Hale," he said, carefully pronouncing the unfamiliar name. "You are no warrior, not of noble birth, not possessing power worthy of the legends of my people. And yet she chose you. Explain to me why, because I honestly don't understand." Derek rose to his feet, brushed the dust off his knees, and answered as honestly as he could. "I don't know, to be honest. I was just scared, hurt, and I needed help. I asked politely, because how else could I ask for help? I wasn't thinking about winning. I wasn't thinking about power. I was only thinking about surviving the next night." Vorhak was silent for a long time, considering these words with the same seriousness with which you consider a military strategy before a decisive battle. "Perhaps," he said finally, "my people have confused strength with dignity for too long." He turned to his guards, and his voice held something none of them had ever heard from their admiral: humility. "We return home. There is no prize here worthy of war. Here is only a lesson that 20 generations of my kind have refused to learn. The Dracorian fleet left the Kavsharam system that same day, but the story of Admiral Kasatriya's meeting with the man chosen by the arm of the First One spread across the galaxy at a speed that even the fastest hyperspace ships could not match. Next to arrive were the Veltarian sages, a race whose reputation was built on the infallibility of their prophecies, their ability to calculate probabilities with precision unmatched by other species. Their arrival was quiet, lacking the military pomp of the Dracorians. A single ship, a single representative, an old sage named Celoria, whose eyes saw 1,000 possible futures simultaneously, and whose presence radiated a calm far more terrifying than any show of force. She found Derek not in the sanctuary, but outside, where he, still getting used to the new sensations that the living armor gave him, watched the setting an alien sun over the dead ruins of an ancient civilization. I've calculated thousands of possible outcomes for your encounter with Bronya. Human, she said without preamble, her voice soft but laced with the anxiety of a being whose calculations have been proven wrong for the first time in a long time. You weren't in any of those outcomes. Sorry for ruining your statistics. Derek replied with a slight grin that seemed to catch the sage off guard more than any complex philosophical argument. This is no joke, she said seriously. Our predictions are based on millennia of observation of patterns in intelligent life. Power seeks power. Power seeks power. This is a fundamental law we've observed in every civilization, from the simplest to the most advanced. The armor of the First Ones, judging by all the data we've collected over 3,000 years, should have chosen a being who fits this pattern. The strongest of the strong, the wisest of the wise, a leader with the absolute right to rule. Maybe, Derek said, looking at the sunset, your pattern was wrong all along. Celoria was silent for a long time, considering these simple words with the same seriousness with which she might have considered the collapse of an entire philosophical school. Explain, she finally asked. Derek thought for a moment, choosing his words. You say that strength seeks strength. But what if true strength isn't what you've been measuring for all these millennia? What if true strength is the ability to remain yourself even in the moment of absolute powerlessness? I lay there. He nodded toward the sanctuary. Broken, afraid, without a single chance of survival on my own. And the only thing left was a choice. Demand help, as if the world owed me something, or beg for it, acknowledging that I have no right to it beyond simple human dignity. Maybe that's exactly what the armor was looking for, not strength of body, but strength of character at the moment when character is truly tested. Not when you have everything, but when you have nothing. Celoria looked at him with a long, searching gaze, as if she saw before her not just a man, but a living refutation of the fundamental principle on which the entire philosophy of her people was built. Your species is young, she said finally. Young and, by our standards, technologically primitive. But perhaps that's why you preserve something that older races lost over millennia of pursuit of power and perfection, the ability to remain vulnerable and ask for help without shame. People aren't perfect, Derek agreed. We make mistakes all the time. But maybe that's why we haven't forgotten what it's like to need each other. Celoria departed the planet that evening, but before her ship disappeared among the stars, she sent a message to the Council of the Great Commonwealth, the contents of which later became known throughout the galaxy. Our models for predicting civilizational development require revision. Humanity is exhibiting a behavioral pattern previously undocumented in any studied race. Strength based not on dominance, but on the mutual recognition of vulnerability. I recommend an immediate review of the status of human civilization within the Commonwealth. The news of what happened on Kavsharam continued to spread, accumulating details, legends, and interpretations, each of which, in its own way, attempted to explain the inexplicable, how the youngest, most underestimated sentient being in the known galaxy had managed to achieve what the greatest empires and wisest orders had failed to achieve in 3,000 years. But the real test came neither from the Dracorians nor the Veltarians. It came from Derek's own government, the Earth Council, which, upon learning of the incident, dispatched a delegation of high-ranking officials demanding the immediate delivery of the artifact for safe study and potential military use. Derek met the delegation at the Commonwealth Orbital Station, where he was eventually evacuated after several weeks on Kavsharam. Weeks in which he and Bronya had come to understand each other far more deeply than anyone could have expected in such a short time. The head of the delegation, a distinguished man named Richard Davenport, whose career had been built on political maneuvering rather than actual achievement, began the conversation with the same self-assurance with which the Dracorian warriors and Voltarian sages had approached him. "Mr. Hale," he said with a forced smile, "you must understand that a discovery of this magnitude belongs not to a single individual, but to all of humanity. The armor must be handed over to the government for study, so that we can extract from it the technology necessary to protect our species." Derek, standing in full armor, felt the energy beneath its surface pulsate slightly, not threateningly, but wary, as if listening to the conversation with the same intent he was listening to himself. "With respect," Derek replied, "but this isn't just a weapon or technology that can be sent like a parcel. This is a sentient being, and it's already made its choice." "Mr. Hale," Davenport lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret of national importance, "do you understand the significance of this discovery for the security of all humanity? We have only recently joined the galactic community. Our position is precarious. Possessing technology of this level could radically change our status among the stellar powers." "I understand," Derek said calmly, "but you seem to be missing the point. The armor has demonstrated 3 times in the last month that it will not tolerate being used as a tool for power. The Dracorian Empire tried to take it by force for 3,000 years and was rebuffed. You're proposing to take it by political pressure. Do you think the outcome will be different?" Davenport paused for a moment, clearly not expecting such a rebuff from a man whose reputation until recently had been limited to a modest position as an engineer on a research mission. "We are not offering force," he said finally, trying to maintain a diplomatic tone. "We are offering cooperation for the good of our species." Brony's voice boomed out at that moment, not just in Derek's mind, but out loud enough for everyone in the conference room to hear. "Let me be clear, representative of a human government. I waited 3,000 years not because I was seeking a powerful ally to further someone's political ambitions. I waited for someone who understood the difference between strength that serves others and strength that serves only oneself. Derek Hale asked for my help when he was on the brink of death, and he asked for nothing more than what was necessary for survival. He did not try to use me to conquer planets, for political aggrandizement, or to dominate other races. That is why I chose him, and that is why I will remain with him, regardless of the demands of any government, including his own." Silence fell over the room. Davenport, accustomed to political pressure and state interests usually proving sufficient arguments in any negotiations, found himself in a position he was unprepared for, arguing not with a human being, but with a 3,000-year-old mind whose priorities had nothing to do with earthly politics. "Fine," he said finally, admitting defeat with ill-concealed irritation. "But you must understand, Mr. Hale, that your decision has consequences for all of humanity. Other races will judge us by your behavior. Then let them judge by the fact that a man on the brink of death asked for help respectfully, rather than demanding it with threat." Derek replied, "I think that sends a pretty good message about who we are." The delegation left the station empty-handed, but the seeds had been sown, not only in the minds of officials forced to reconsider their ideas about how to handle finds of such magnitude, but also in the minds of the entire galaxy, which watched the unfolding story with growing interest. Months later, as Derek, now officially recognized by the Commonwealth as a unique bearer of an ancient sentient artifact, continued to serve as a link between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, the story of his encounter with the first armor became more than just legend, but a turning point in how the galaxy perceived a young, newly adopted race from the outlying blue planet. The Dracorian Empire, shaken by the lesson taught to their proud admiral, began slowly to reconsider its centuries-old philosophy, which held that strength was determined solely by physical and military superiority. The Voltarian Order, whose predictive models had proven fundamentally flawed for the first time in millennia, began a profound study of human psychology, attempting to understand a behavioral pattern that had eluded them for centuries. And Derek himself, a simple engineer who never sought glory, never dreamed of greatness, continued to wear the armor that had rejected emperors and sages for 3,000 years, with the same simple honesty with which he asked them for help on the first day of his meeting with them. "Do you regret anything?" Bronya asked him one day, as the two of them watched another sunset, this time from one of the Commonwealth's orbital stations, among the stars that 3,000 years ago witnessed the destruction of the civilization that created it. No, Derek answered honestly, although sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I'd never crashed on that planet, if I'd never met you. And what do you think? He thought for a moment, looking at the endless starry sky that stretched out before him. I think I would have lived an ordinary life, he said finally. Not a bad one. Not miserable. Just ordinary. But I probably never would have learned what I know now. That dignity isn't measured by strength, power, or birth. It's measured by how you treat others when you have nothing, and how you handle power when you suddenly have it. For 3,000 years I've waited to hear these words from someone who truly understands them, Bronya said, and her voice, devoid of a physical body, but filled with ancient, profound wisdom, held something akin to the satisfaction of a being whose long wait has finally found meaning. My wait has been long, Derek Hale, but it seems it was worth it. And somewhere far away in the archives of the great Commonwealth, the story of the man chosen by the armor of the first entered the annals not as a tale of the victory of the strongest, but as a lesson for the entire galaxy. That true strength lies not in demand, but in request, not in dominance, but in respect, and that sometimes the youngest, most underestimated being in the universe can teach the most ancient civilizations a lesson they have failed to learn over millennia of their own. History. The galaxy fell silent that day on Kavsharam, not from fear or awe at the display of power, but from the realization of a truth humanity seemed to have always known, but which the rest of the universe was only beginning to grasp. Greatness does not lie in taking what you want. Greatness lies in asking with respect, and earning it by being who you are,